Okay, guys. Hello.
One moment, please.
Okay.
Po angielsku, nim zaczniemy, Jarosław przychodzi do nas z tematem Hotwire, temat bardzo modny obecnie, fajny i ja mam też takie swoje osobiste doświadczenia z przejścia z Reacta na Hotwire. Bardzo czekam na tą kreskę. No i co? Powodzenia, scena jest twoja.
Yeah, thank you. Dzień dobry wszystkim. The presentation is going to be in English. My name is Jarosław. I speak English, mówię po polsku. Myślę, że normalnie mówię po polsku, ale for work, English is much better. I also speak a few other languages. You can find me on GitHub, on Twitter, you can DM me. So, a couple of words about me. Somebody might know me from the YouTube channel. A part of that, I also have a blog that has, well, quite a lot of posts and around 5,000 monthly visitors at the moment, like all Rails. Yeah, and also I created a few Udemy courses. This is the most popular of them. And for work, I work at a French startup named Barra. So yeah, that's me and the team. And I do a very specific job. So like there are a lot of Rails developers, but I do a very specific job. I was hired to do something like a front-end Rails job. So I'm kind of a front-end Ruby on Rails developer. And a bit about the stack of the company. So previously, before 2020, the company used to use Rails, GraphQL, and React. And after a pivot, there was a plan to rewrite the application, and decided to rewrite the application using Hotwire and ViewComponent. So we ditched React, and that's where I jump in. Now, React is good. I'm not saying like Hotwire is great, React sucks. These are tools for different jobs. In my personal opinion, like React is when you've got a lot of people who can, like when you've got people that are capable of really specializing in React, other people are specializing in Rails. So when you have a bigger team and the people can like be really great at something they do. And also, I think like if you're building a desktop experience, then you're just fine with going with Hotwire. If you're building a desktop and a mobile experience, then you will anyway be writing an API, and then it makes sense to have React, because anyway you'll have some kind of API. And if you use Hotwire, one of the main benefits is a much faster development cycle. So like it isn't a person, a developer isn't a person who has to be like great at two really different technologies like front-end React and like kind of back-endish Rails, but it's just like the same Rails developer building the whole application, and he doesn't have to have really strong front-end framework skills. And thinking further, I kind of think that, well, usually I would, as a consumer, I would want to consume information through like my phone and a mobile app. As a business user, I would be using a desktop. So generally, like if you're building a B2B application, if it's going to be a desktop experience, I personally think that it's like makes sense to build a desktop first application. And if it is like consumer focused, then it makes sense to like use React and build all the APIs and build a mobile application. So going back to our company and our front-end stack. So we use Hotwire, we use ViewComponent, Tailwind. I'm so proud to say that we moved away from Webpacker to CSS and JS bundling, and moved away from Sass to post-CSS. And this is my most favorite PR merge of all time. The PR where we migrated away from Webpacker to using JS bundling and CSS bundling. And have a look at this, beautiful. Yeah.
How much time did you save by doing this?
By doing this?
Because there was probably, it was taking some time to do the asset compilation and stuff.
I mean, I guess the compilation before took, I know, like 40 seconds, 30 seconds, and I mean, you don't even notice it now. So like an unnoticeable. Yeah. So anyway, like we've got this kind of front end that we have to write inside our Rails application. And what do we already have? Like what technologies do we use to kind of write some kind of helpers for our front end, for our views? How do we write our view logic? Where do we store it? Well, we've got helpers, we've got decorators, like in nearly any Rails app, and often you would be willing to add some kind of like tag into a helper. So like in a helper you would have some kind of tag.div and some kind of logic there. Well, the problem with helpers is that they're global. So like if you've got a created at inside your post helper and a created at inside your users helper, then it can, well, you can have some kind of conflicts in the information that you expect to see. And the decorators are object specific. And well, really writing a good front-end application in Rails, I think is impossible without using ViewComponent. So ViewComponent is, I would say, not less important than Hotwire in writing like a real full stack Rails application monolith. And again, like when you write the front end of an application, where does it start? It starts with the designs. So this is an example of like the Figma where we've got badges. So we've got like a lot of badges provided by our designer, and each badge has lots of different variants. And we have to implement these badges somehow in our application. Would we write some kind of crazy, I don't know, partial? Would we write some kind of crazy helper? That's where ViewComponent can really shine. So this is what this actual component looks okay inside our application. So we've got basically a library of all the ViewComponents that we have in our application, and anybody in the staging environment and in localhost can view all the components and different variants of these components. And it makes it much easier to see what we have, and the designers can also see what we have and what we don't have in our application, and design new components based on this. And here's the code itself of this badge component. So we've got a .rb file, so a ViewComponent file that describes. We've got an HTML template, and we've got a CSS file that all describe this ViewComponent. We've got a lot of variants, we've got some validations, and we've got a lot of CSS classes for each type of these components. And it lets us have just this really tiny 10-line HTML file to be able to render all these kinds of variants of this badge. And I would say there are two types of ViewComponents. So the first type is when we have some kind of abstract view object like a badge, and we have a lot of variants that we can decide to use to describe this badge to render the exact HTML that we want. And the second type of ViewComponent, I would say, is an organic one, where we don't pass some kind of information that like says that the corners should be rounded or not, color should be blue or not, but where we pass an object. So this is an inventory item component, and these are all inventory items. And based on logic that we put inside this inventory item component.rb, different data is rendered for different types of these objects. So here we just pass an object, and we also store this component-based logic inside the ViewComponent, and it renders stuff correctly. And also you can surely have components inside the components. So here we have this inventory item component, and inside this inventory item component we render other components, where we also possibly pass some kind of data from this inventory item component. Yeah, and sometimes there is a question like here, for example, there is a CSS file that describes this badge component. Do you always have to have a CSS file per each component or not? The answer is no. I mean, you can just write some tailwind in line. You can just have some CSS in your main application CSS file. Like having a badge.css file is just for you to be able to better structure your code, but you don't have to do it. The same with JS. So like sometimes you can want to write a stimulus controller that will do something specific to a ViewComponent. You can put it inside the ViewComponents folder, but you don't have to. And generally we tend to write a stimulus controller that can be reused by more than one ViewComponent, and that could be just used in the HTML. So the answer is it depends. Yeah, and generally the biggest challenge with like writing kind of components for the Rails frontend, in my opinion, is customizing form inputs. So like you know, you've got a select, you've got a multi-select, and here are a couple of examples where we had to have a drop-down, where we have a multi-select with search, with select all, and so on. Or here, we didn't want to use the default HTML dropdown. We wanted to write our own CSS for the dropdown. A bit less complicated than this. This is kind of like one of the most complicated field inputs that we did, but it is quite challenging. And again, like, should we use Rails partials and templates? Should we use view components? Some people would argue that, okay, there is a benchmark that view components are 10 times faster than Rails partials and templates. I would correct it up to 10 times faster. And no, you don't have to use view components everywhere. You can mix them the way you feel best. But generally, then you see that there is view logic that you want to put somewhere, then you would maybe want to use a view component for this particular thing. And the second element that I wanted to talk about is Hotwire. So as, okay, just a question, who has used the view component before? Okay, 1, 2, great. And who has used the Hotwire commercially or non-commercially, just for fun? Okay, quite a lot. Nice to see that. So yeah, like Hotwire has currently 3 different modules: Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and StimulusJS. And a very important thing to understand about Hotwire: it is not Ruby on Rails specific, so it can exist outside of the Ruby on Rails ecosystem. And as an example, there is this brilliant package by Tony Messiah, Turbo Laravel, that incorporates Turbo Frames and Turbo Streams into helpers to reuse them in the Laravel framework. And well, StimulusJS doesn't need that because it's just like a JS library that you can plug into anything. And the one really specific part of Hotwire that is like specific to Ruby on Rails are broadcasts. So in Turbo Streams, we've got Turbo Streams that respond to your interaction. Let's say you click a button and the like count increases. And another type of Turbo Streams, I would divide them like in normal Turbo Streams and broadcasts. Is pushing updates asynchronously. So like you've just got a tab open or a few tabs open, they have a connection, and even without your user input, you receive some kind of information. So like somebody pinned you or you received a notification. So that is what broadcast is. And I guess 2 months ago or a month ago on the previous Miloshny Ruby meetup, there was an extensive presentation specifically on Turbo Stream broadcasts. Okay, and well, at work, in the application that we're building, we use a real lot of Hotwire, and I think I can show you a live demo of some really cool interactions we have on the front end, where we use different Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and so on. So here, for example, I have this button to add a data type. I click it, and nothing happens. The classic. Let's see. Okay, sure. So I click Add Data Type, and a model pops up. I can search, and it searches by like houses, browser, whatever. You see? I can go to these as folders. So let's say I have the folder named Sensitive. I have a folder, and I have like records inside this folder, basically like normal folders. I go into this folder, I select something. I can go to a previous tab, I can go even further. So basically a file structure that we built to make it easier for the user to find stuff in the folders where he keeps it. Another example, so here we have a different interface, and the idea is that whenever the user opens this page, if he opens it for the first time, then he sees a pop-up module with a welcoming message. So I open a page, and we have a stimulus controller that conditionally clicks on a link when it is the first time the user opens this page, and basically the stimulus controller clicks this help button, and it shows up this modal. So also a nice interaction. On the same page, we have this thing. Let's say we have a table, like 3 attributes. We can select either none or PHI. And the update button is, well, we can't click it. Why can't we click it? Because we have not changed anything in the form. So I would like make it PHI. You see there is an update here, and also the update button on the form became active. So in each of these cases, we kind of re-render the update button based on the input. So like whenever the user clicks any of these buttons, we send a request to the server. The server sees if anything has been changed in the user input, and if there has been a change, then we re-render the update button. Okay, so here is another interface where the user has to pass something like a questionnaire. So let's say I select monolith. Okay, it's a bit broken. Oh, I have to restart the session. Okay, so let's say I select monolith for my mobile app, done. You see no page refresh, but it automatically closed the previous tab, opened a new tab, and scrolled me down. Let's try again. I will like select something. I click done, it closed the previous tab, it scrolled me down, opened the new tab, and you see there's like no real page refresh. And also an interesting thing, so like add missing integration. And we have this modal, we can search for something, we can have tabs, and you see like no page reload, so it works really seamlessly. Or in this interface, again, we've got like a generate token button. Imagine like you're on AWS, for example, and you want to generate an API token, and you want the user to see it only once. So I add the token name, click save, and you see there was a snack bar, like a flash message. And you see the previous like interface, the previous content of this model has been replaced with the token. I can click copy. For this copy, we use a stimulus controller, and you see also we have like you click copy, it replaces with copied for a few seconds, and the token has been saved. I click close, and you never see this token again. Or here, for example, we have an interface to create a record. Let's say we select something, click next. You can always go back. Let's say we click next. We try to add. The validation errors are rendered, and there is no like page refresh or whatever. It looks quite seamless as for me. I click add. There is a third step of the modal. I can confirm or go back, and the data is saved. So the whole goal of this kind of demo was to show a few, like, as I think, really cool interfaces that you can build using Hotwire. And well, for our needs, at least at our company, like there weren't really any limitations to the user interfaces that we wanted to build, and in all these cases, like we found a solution just inside the limits of the Hotwire technology without having to resort to anything else. Yeah, and I've been working like a lot with Hotwire in the last year, and when you work a lot with the same thing, you start noticing some kind of patterns in your own application or like around other applications, stuff that like always happens when you use some kind of tool. So something that really always happens that when you use turbo frames is, imagine like you've got a dashboard and you've got like 5 different elements on the dashboard, and loading the dashboard can take quite a long time, because you need all these computations for each of these elements to run. You can use a turbo frame so that each part of this dashboard loads asynchronously. It's the most simple use case, but it like saves a lot of time for the user waiting for a page to load. In TurboStreams, it might be a bit hard to explain, but basically, you in the application HTML, like in the main file, you will always want some kind of a div with an ID for flash messages, where you will push the flash messages to the user. You will always have a broadcast listening to the current user whenever somebody like wants to send something to a specific user, and there will always be a broadcast that will be listening globally. So when you want to send a global notification and notify all the users that are having a connection to your application at the moment. You will always want to build modals, infinite pagination, and typehead search. Typehead search meaning like results are updated as you type. In StimulusJS, you will always want to add some kind of drop-downs, tabs, checkboxes. Like this is kind of HTML and JS stuff. It's not like server-side rendering, so you still need to write some minimalistic JS. Debounce, so like submitting after a few seconds as the person types, and copy-paste as I showed previously. And again, it's really important when you just start learning Hotwire, you don't really have to mix TurboFrames, TurboStreams, and Stimulus. Each of these technologies can work completely separately, and mixing them can really augment the experience, like what you can do with them. But you don't have to mix them. You can, but you don't have to. And at some points of time, you can feel that like what is given to you, like 7 TurboStream actions, is not in refresh a TurboFrame with a TurboStream. Or you want to have a multi-step form when, so that when you like select country, only the city input gets updated. When you select city, only the address input gets updated, and so on. And these are my 2 most favorite like stimulus controllers that I use in all my applications that really help with any experience. Like this click on connect controller, for example, I use to re-render a TurboFrame with a TurboStream, or for example, open the modal that I showed you, like this onboarding modal. When you go to a page and a modal pops up after you open the page. Again, I'm using like this click on connect controller. So I say open if it is the first time the user visits the page, or false, for example. And this controller, the other one, is great for dynamic forms. So again, on the previous Ruby meetup, each time there was the word like Node.js, Node.js, everybody was yay! Well, I myself am not a big fan of writing a lot of JS, but a couple of lines of JS can take you a long, long, long way. So the answer is like, not much. But I mean, if you're building a full stack like Ruby on Rails monolith application where you serve the front end, you will still need to write some JS. And there's no better way, and for me personally, more fun way for writing just a bit of JS than Stimulus. Yeah, and a few challenges that we've been having. So like moving the application from React to Hotwire, and actually like developing an application with Hotwire, a technology that is like less than 2 years old. Well, the first is like moving the mindset from writing a React application to Hotwire. So for example, our designer, she's an extremely experienced designer with 10 years of doing different stuff, and she's been like spending the last few years designing interfaces based on like what she would be doing with React. So like she knows what she can expect in the React application. She can think of some kind of fancy transitions and so on. And like shifting the mindset from like designing for a React application to a Hotwire application. I mean, you can do most of the stuff with Hotwire, but there are still some like minor things, like for example, beautiful page transitions. Another thing, like, what are the limits of this technology? When do I know that, like, I need to use something different than Hotwire to render something the way I want? So this is also like a big question to me, like, how much can I push the limit of what this technology gives me? And a classic example, at some point of time we had this thing, like we've got basically a header and we've got a search form, and these are all form.selects. So all of these are like drop downs. And this is like a form, and here we've got pagination, here we've got sorting. And basically like some stuff has to be refreshed, some stuff doesn't have to be refreshed when we search or when we sort. So like placing stuff in the same div, like what can be and what can't be in the same div can in some cases be also like a tricky question. And takeaways, I know this is the first picture that showed up when I googled takeaways. So like, if you had to remember just a few things from the presentation, it's ViewComponents is awesome, and I think like if you're building a Rails monolith, there is no excuse to not use ViewComponent to like structure the HTML that you are going to serve and structuring the logic behind this HTML. Again, Hotwire can work outside Rails, StimulusJS can work outside Rails, and frames and streams can exist separately. And a bit of JS can take you a long, long way. Well, at some point, when you have already like built a great application with Hotwire, then your designer comes and says, it's not enough. I want something like more crazy, like some kind of sometimes like I mean Hotwire has like just 7 actions. So there is stimulus reflex that has like more than 20 reflexes. Like a reflex is something like a turbo stream action. And there is any cable. So if you keep digging in the direction of like server-side rendering, you'll also want to technologies. And in a world where Hotwire doesn't exist, where stimulus reflex doesn't exist, what would I be using? I would be using most likely Phoenix Live View, maybe HTMX, or maybe something else. But I think these two are the best candidates what you could be using as a modern technology for server-side rendering, a part of what Rails offers you right now. And that's basically it. Don't forget to subscribe, write me a love letter on Twitter or whatever. Yeah, any questions?
What happens to the React developers?
Fired. Okay, thank you.